John. Thanks for having me, John, and thank you all for being here. Before I start, I wanted to give just a quick overview about where I'm headed. I am going to look at 4 sections of the Inferno, 2 from the beginning part and 2 from the end. And there are 2 themes that I want to focus on as we talk. And the first is contrapasso, and then the second is the fourfold scriptural interpretation that Dante recommends that you apply to the Inferno itself. So as we go along, I have a couple sections that I've quoted and that I'll be reading from. I used Giardi's translation. It was the first one that I've encountered Dante reading, and I like him a lot. I've read other ones, and I think there are other ones that are lovely, but this is sort of my favorite. So that's the one I'm quoting from. And I also wanted to start with a question that I'm not going to answer till the end. So I wanted to pose it to you and let you ponder it as I talk, and then we'll come back at the very end. So the question is one that I've borrowed from a fellow classical educator, Joshua Gibbs, and it's just this: is hell locked from within or without? So there's the thing to ponder. The first section that I want to talk about is the circle of the lustful. Circle 2, it's sort of the beginning of hell proper. We've had limbo and we've had the opportunists, but now we're dealing with sins that are a little bit more concrete. The first sustained conversation that Dante has in the Inferno with a sinner is the one that he has with Francesca, who's in this circle. I think she's incredibly memorable, and she's also one of the most referenced bits of the Inferno that you'll see. And there's a really good reason, several really good reasons for that. I also think that she sets the tone for the rest of what's going to come in the Inferno, and she gives you a clue. The encounter that Dante has with her gives us a clue as to how to look at the rest of the Inferno. So that's why I'm sort of cheating and talking about the beginning of the Inferno, but I will be talking about the end too. So bear with me, please, and thank you. Here's the section we're going to read. Love, this is Francesca. So Dante sees her and he goes over and talks to her and he says, like, what's your story? And she says this: love, which in gentlest hearts will soonest bloom, seized my lover with passion for that sweet body, from which I was torn unshriven to my doom. Love, which permits no loved one not to love, took me so strongly with delight in him, that we are one in hell as we were above. Love led us to one death. So that's the first explanation that she gives for why she's in hell. And then we have a little bit of info that I'm not going to read. And then she gives you a second sort of take on her story. And you'll notice that the first take and the second take aren't going to match up. And this is the first clue that we shouldn't trust the damned in hell. Here's the rest of her story. One day for dalliance, we read the rhyme of Lancelot, how love had mastered him. We were alone with innocence and dim time. Pause after pause, that high old story drew our eyes together while we blushed and paled. But it was one soft passage overthrew our caution and our hearts. For when we read how her fond Guinevere, her fond smile was kissed by such a lover, he, Lancelot, who is one with me alive and dead, breathed on my lips the tremor of his kiss. That book and he who wrote it was a pander. That day we read no further. So, as was mentioned a little bit in the first section of our meeting, there are some moments in our story, in the story that Francesca is telling, that should give us pause. So when she's asked why she's in hell, she tells a really compelling story. And she says that love is what caused her to be in hell. And she makes love the active agent in her telling. Look, love, 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 3 times. And all of her explanation about why she's in hell makes it sound like she had no control over it. Like love was some disease that she caught accidentally. I'm like, who would know? How could it happen? It just hit her. Like she fell down and now she can't get up. And in doing this, she's really clearly passing the buck, right? Ma'am, we have some control over who we love, do we not? That's what I always think when I read her story. But I teach teenagers, right? So this kind of talk is not unfamiliar to me, and I do it myself. My teens are wonderful. But also, we are all sinners. Okay, so then the second part of the story, she changes again. It's not love that's the active agent. It's not love that's compelling, that's forcing her to do anything. It's a book. It's literature. The power of literature moved us. I teach literature. I have taught literature for many a year. I think literature can change your life. I hope that lots of literature does change your life for the better. but she's taking all moral responsibility and she's throwing it at the feet of this book, this powerful book. They had no idea. I mean, they weren't thinking that anything was going to go wrong. They were just reading, minding their own business, as was mentioned. Really fishy. Like, I have a brother-in-law. There's no way I'd read racy literature with him. Like, I just wouldn't do it. And you'll also notice that she's not explaining her relationship to Paolo at all. She's not mentioning that she's married. She's not mentioning that he's married. None of that comes into her explanation at all. It's just all these other things that have caused her to have this terrible place in the afterlife. And then she ends, and I didn't include this section, but she ends mentioning that the one who killed them, that's her husband, will be in an even deeper pit of hell, which is a really uncharitable kind thing to be saying. Right. Of course, we don't really expect her to be kind, but there she is. She's consistent. One little thing I wanted to note, because Dante is so full of references to other moments in literature and history, and the references and the allusions can come so fast and thick that they can be disorienting, right? He references all these people who we maybe have no clue who they are, maybe we know a little bit of who they are, and he references other writings that maybe we're familiar with, but we didn't sort of clock that that's what he's doing, that he's referencing that. So this last bit here, when she says, that day we read no further, it's a pretty clear parallel to Augustine's Confessions. So when Augustine is coming to Christ, when he has his great conversion moment, that's what he said. Like, that's part of his story. He says that he was reading scripture, right? And it moved him. And then he read no further and he's turned towards God. And it's this beautiful redemptive moment, right? For Augustine. It's the moment that we've been waiting for in the Confessions. And Augustine is serving as the sort of inspiration here for this moment, but it's infernal and it's twisted. And what they're reading no further, because probably they're doing more than just kissing, right? They're sinning. And so if you know the story of the Confessions, you know that Augustine's besetting sin is the sin that Paolo and Francesca are punished for in hell as well. So there's just sort of this little intertextual moment that I think is very fun because I'm a nerd. So there it is. So she's blaming everybody but herself, and she's leaving out really crucial bits of the story that help you understand who she is. And Dante's original readers presumably, would have known her story because she was quite scandalous, and it was the sort of story that people talked about. It was a sort of fodder for gossip during his day. So they would have known and would have had little alarm bells going off. But we're so far removed that unless you've read the footnotes or you've listened to somebody tell you, you wouldn't know. So now we know. Okay. Paolo and Francesca are a really lovely example of contrapasso, which is the infernal system of retribution wherein the punishments in hell are reflections of the sins that landed each group in hell. And to understand the Divine Comedy, to understand the Inferno is it's just contrapasso helps you and gives you one of the main clues to sort of what's going on and how to make sense of the story. And also, I think it gives us a really clear picture of some of Dante's hope, like some of the messages that he wants us to receive as we are reading. So Francesca is a really, really great example of contrapasso. And she also is a really great example of the way that sinners choose their fates in the Inferno. So this is the one quote that I've included that's not from Ciardi. This is Pinsky, a translator that I recommend and enjoy. This is Dante, and he says, "Justice of God, who is it that heaps together so much torture and travail?" Right? He's looking at hell. He's looking at all the people who are suffering in hell. And then he says, "How is it that we choose to sin and wither?" So if we take a look at the contrapasso, we can notice that the damned are living out their sins in hell. They continue as they were on earth. The lustful gave up their wills to their passions. The lustful let themselves be carried away by their sin and by their passions. And in so doing, they abdicate control. And that's what Francesca's trying to say. And that's how Francesca's trying to spin, right? Like, I didn't have any control. And it's like, no, you made a choice to give up control. And in the afterlife, they likewise have no control over where they go, right? Because their punishment is that they're being blown about in these winds. And they have no ability to control where they're going. They also don't have the ability to touch anyone. And I think this is another little intertextual moment, right? If you've read Homer or you've read Virgil, you know that his depictions of the afterlife are definitely in the back of Dante's mind while he's writing. And one of the more moving bits of Homer's story comes when Odysseus goes to the afterlife and he tries to touch his mother, who's a shade there, and he can't. He tries to embrace her and he's not able to do so. And it's this beautiful moment where you see his piety. He didn't know that she died while he was on his journey. And so he sees her in the afterlife and he's shocked and upset by what he sees. And he can't even hug his mom, right? And so you have that in the back of your head and you think, like, yeah, piety, beautiful moment. And then you see Paolo and Francesca who are being blown around and they can't touch each other. And for them, it increases their frustration, it increases their torment because of this, the lust is what got them into hell. Their bodies is what led them into this punishment. And now they see each other, but they can never touch. And so their sadness and their torture is sort of built up in this, is sort of caught up in this moment too. And it's wrong. It's like we don't want them to continue to, be acting on their lust in hell. But each part of their punishment filters into the sin that landed them where they are. So it's poetic retribution. But it also feels more like a consequence than an arbitrary punishment, right? Contrapasso makes it feel like they've picked where they are, like they've chosen to sin and wither. And hell is a place where that is just that's what happens in hell. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's talk about the next sort of framing device that I want to think about today, and that's the fourfold reading of Dante. So, as has been mentioned before, there are four different levels or layers that you can come to scripture or to a story like the Divine Comedy with, and four lenses to look at the story through. So the literal is just what's happening in the story. The allegorical is what's going on under the surface. So characters, events, things symbolize something else, another character, another event, another story. And so you create this dual meaning. And then the moral reading and the moral meaning is just, the lesson that you take. And then the anagogical is similar to the allegorical, but the message relates to truths about the afterlife. And it's often not clear what those are going to be. It's often not clear sort of how the whole picture will come out to be because we're not in the afterlife yet. So in a way, all of Dante, because he's writing about the afterlife, all of Dante can be read in this anagogical way. Okay, so if we think about this fourfold reading and we apply it to the circle of the lustful, on the surface, Dante is seeing these people blown about by the wind. He's talking to them. He's hearing their story, which is to be questioned because they're lying. And then at the end of his story, he faints. He's so moved by compassion. He's so moved by the suffering of these souls in front of him that he faints away. This creates some interest if you think about the Inferno as sort of a travel story, right? In a sense, on the surface, it is. Here's this guy, he's going on this journey, he's seeing these different places, and he's having these experiences. It also is sort of helpful to transition. So the transition from the second circle to the third circle doesn't happen, it happens off stage because he's fainted and he just wakes up and he's in this new place. The allegorical meaning is where things start to get interesting. If we think about the fact that these are the first two sinners the first sinner that he's really talking to. She goes with Paolo, but Paolo doesn't say anything. She doesn't even say his name, which Mark Vernon points out is perhaps significant. He's not really a full person to her. So we have these first two sinners that he's looking at and talking to one of them. And they can serve allegorically as sort of an Adam and Eve for our story. They are images of the damned, absolutely. But their sin, in a way, is sort of what leads us, the reader, into the Inferno, right? As Adam and Eve's sin is the sin that leads us into the story of Genesis. Now, this is not a perfect analogy because Adam and Eve have more significance than Paolo and Francesca. But if we think about them as this sort of fallen, twisted image of Adam and Eve, I think it's helpful because their sin, this not taking responsibility, this spinning, this not viewing each other as fully souls and fully peopled in the way that they are, is what the rest of the people in hell are going to do too. So if you understand what Paolo and Francesca are doing, it's really helpful to understand what everybody else is going to do in the same way that Adam and Eve's sin brings to light, right, our own fallenness that we've experienced, that we experience in this world. Okay. Here's where the allegorical meaning gets even more layered. So Dante is most famous for the Divine Comedy. But before he wrote the Divine Comedy, he wrote love poetry. He wrote the kind of love poetry that Paolo and Francesca are reading. So when he is moved by pity, when he recognizes and highlights the like the power that literature can have, you can see in this almost like self-recrimination, right? Like Dante writes about things that are certainly not the high content that we're going to get to in Paradise. And this moment when he faints with pity is almost like he's confessing his own complicity in this sin, right? Like maybe he's not committing lust in the way that Paolo and Francesca did. He's not, sleeping with his in-law, but he's part of this bigger problem, right? He's contributed to this ecosystem. He's put literature out into the world that potentially is going to lead people astray. And when he faints with pity, we, the reader, need to see that that is the wrong reaction. Like, that's not what you're supposed to do. If you encounter the damned, if you encounter people who are sinning, who sinned, who continue to sin, and your first reaction is, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What a horrible thing that's happened to you. I'm so overwhelmed. My emotions are so moved that I'm going to literally not be awake anymore. Then that's a problem, right? And think about it. The lustful let their emotions lead them. What is Dante doing when he faints? He's letting his emotions lead him. You know the story, sir. You know what she's leaving out. Don't be fainting. That's not the appropriate response. And so we, the reader, have to see that, right? And Dante, the writer, knows that. He knows that. And he has to sort of give us a starting place, right? We're alone in the dark wood. We're crying. We don't know what we're going to do. We're fainting with pity for the damned. And we have to get to God and love and right thinking. And this is one of those steps along the way. Okay, so the moral is pretty clear. Don't pity the damned. And it feels wrong because usually we're supposed to pity. But if you're pitying Francesca, then you're sort of aligned with her, aren't you? Do you want to be aligned with Francesca? I don't think we want to be because she doesn't take responsibility for her actions. And that, ladies and gentlemen, as we know, right, is kind of the first step to, making our way to Christ and to his side. Yeah, you have to take responsibility for what you've done. And Francesca's not doing that. So when you have pity for the damned, you're part of the problem too. Okay. Also, I think that perhaps part of this moral could be like, don't read smut, because it seems like that also is part of what Paolo and Francesca can teach us, right? Like what we read, what we spend our time with, what we study can change us, should change us. So like make sure that you're studying and you're looking and you're reading at things that are good and beautiful and right. And what is it? Whatever's pure, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's good, whatever's lovely, whatever is admirable, think about such things. So I kind of think that that's a moment here where we can see that maybe Dante's trying to push us towards that. Okay, so next section. The Walls of Dis. This is Canto 8. So I'm going to read you this section, and then we're going to think about the contrapasso and then the fourfold scriptural interpretation, and hopefully this will all continue to make sense. So we get to the Walls of Dis, and we read, above the gates, more than 1,000 shades of spirits plunged from heaven for its glory, cried angrily, who is it that invades death's kingdom in his life? My lord and guide advanced a step before me with a sign that he wished to speak to some of them aside, skipping a little bit. So he's talking to the damned on the walls. I could hear my lord's words, but the pack that gathered round him suddenly broke away, howling and jostling, and went pouring back, slamming the towering gate hard in his face. That great soul stood alone outside the wall. Then he came back. When he came back, his pain showed in his pace. Okay, so on the surface, they get to the Walls of Dis, and the demons who are there guarding slam the door in their faces and they won't let them go any further. So it's this nice little moment in our travel story, a little bit of interest. It's not just all smooth sailing for them. In order to understand the broader significance of this passage, we need to zoom out a little bit. So this is Chardy's illustration. One of the reasons I like his translation is that he has these pictures and I'm a visual person. So if you take a look, we are at the Walls of Dis, which is the dividing line between upper hell and lower hell. And we have some waterways that are also there. And all of these sections here are indicated. So we're getting into the bottom bit of hell. And then if we go here, I've sort of cleaned it up and given some context. If we take a look, the first 5 circles, and really it's like 2 through 5 more than it is 1. But anyway, the first bit of hell connects to the sins of incontinence, excessive animal appetite, and that's upper hell. Then you have the walls of Dis, and then we go into circles 6 and 7, to the circles of violence and bestiality. That's lower hell. And then when we get to circles 8 and 9, we're in the circles that are corresponding to fraud. Those are sins of deception, perverted gifts of the intellect. This is what I call with my students. I don't know if anybody else does, but I teach teenagers, and it's helpful if you have like little phrases to make sense. Anyway, I call that deep hell. So we've got upper hell, lower hell, deep hell. And the dividing line between upper and lower are these walls of Dis. Just for a quick moment, because the layering depth of Dante is something that I find just delightful. The sins correspond to the classifications that come from Aristotle. There are beasts, if you'll remember, in the beginning of the story that correspond to each of the animals. So it corresponds to each of the sins. So there's a beast that goes with each sin. The beasts come from Jeremiah. And one of the best ways, I think, to think about the structuring of hell is to consider the virtues. So if you look at the first sins, the virtue that would sort of fix their problems is moderation. They lack moderation. The virtue that corresponds with that middle classification, so violence and bestiality, is courage. They do not have courage, and their lack of courage is what's causing lots of their problems. And then the last one, fraud, is, as I'm sure you can imagine, wisdom. Wisdom is what they lack, and they've perverted these. So if we think about the way Dante has structured hell, it's one way you can think about it is these perversions of the cardinal, perversions of the virtues. And so that's sort of, I think that's helpful as we're thinking. Okay, so back to the walls of Dis, lest you think it's not connected. The walls of Dis are the dividing mark, and it's really easy to think after you get through the first section of hell, it's really easy, look at the sins again, right? It's really easy to think, oh, what these people need is reason, because they are not paying attention to reason. They're paying attention to passions and emotions and appetites, right? So if you've got Aristotle in the back of your head or Plato in the back of your head, you're like, they just need reason. And if they have reason, they'll be set. And that's all they need. But when you get to the walls of Dis, we've got the embodiment of human reason. Virgil, hello, nice to see you. We've got the embodiment of human reason, unable to advance, right? They slam the doors in his face. He even says, God wants me here. And they're like, we don't care about that. And they slam it. And he's left going, okay, well, I'm sure we've got a backup plan. Like we'll just call for divine aid. Exactly. You'll call for divine aid because your reason alone isn't going to get you where you need to go. You want salvation. You cannot, with your brain, get to salvation. You can't, by your own power, by your own intellect, get to God. You need divine help. And again, this is where we go back to the beginning of our story, right? In the wood of error, Virgil shows up to help Dante because women in heaven who represent like divine love and grace see him and are like, that man needs some help. Let us help him. So it's all grace. It's all God's grace. That's what gets us where we need to go. So that allegorical significance makes, I think, makes quite a lot of sense. And it's really helpful to keep in our head as we go into the deeper parts of hell. Because again, you would think that reason would be a good thing, but the perverted gifts of intellect are at the deepest part of hell. So you have to use the gifts that God has given you properly. You have to use them rightly. And if you don't, it's bad. It's very bad. So there you go. I think the moral message there is clear, right? You need faith and you need rightly ordered love. Reason alone isn't going to make this work. Okay. So now we're at the sections that correspond to lower hell. Circle 8 is a bunch of little sections, pouches, evil pouches, and all of these sinners who are being punished within the evil pouches. And I want to look at pouch 5, which is the grafters. So you may have a translation that gives their sin another name. Bereters is sometimes the word that we encounter. But these are people who have sold or bought offices in political life. So they have sort of messed up the fabric of society by giving jobs and giving authority when they shouldn't. where they shouldn't. They've done it because they wanted money, not because people were actually like suited for the job they were given. And here we see this is the section where Dante is going to encounter physical danger, and he doesn't encounter physical danger anywhere else in the Inferno. So why is it important? Let us take a look. Here's Dante's description. I turned like one who cannot wait to see the thing he dreads, and who, in sudden fright, runs while he looks, his curiosity competing with his terror. And at my back, I saw a figure that came running towards us across the bridge, a demon, huge and black. Ah, what a face he had, all hate and wildness. Galloping so, with his great wings outspread, he seemed the embodiment of all bitterness. Dante goes on. Virgil is saying here. And the master said, you had better not be seen by these fiends till I am ready. Crouch down here. One of these rocks will serve you as a screen. Skipping down a little bit, Virgil goes over, talks to the demons, pretends that he's the only one there, which is deception. Where are we? We're in the circle of fraud. That's not good. Don't like that. But moving on, he says, this is, again, Virgil talking to Dante, who, remember, is hiding behind some rocks. Oh, you crouched like a cat, my guide called to me. Lovely image, right? Dante's crouching like a cat. Among the jagged rock piles of the bridge, come down to me, for now you may come safely. Hearing him, I hurried down the ledge, and the demons all pressed forward when I appeared, so that I feared they might not keep their pledge. Their pledge was not to hurt them. Again, why are we trusting the demons? Anyway, I pressed the whole of my body against my guide. Good choice. And not for an instant did I take my eyes from those black fiends who scowled on every side. They swung their forks, saying to one another, shall we give him a touch in the rump? And answering, sure, give him a taste to pay for his bother. So we have this lovely section. Sorry, maybe lovely is the wrong word. We have this vivid section where we see the demons harassing Virgil and Dante. And we're worried that they're maybe going to be hurt. So my question for you is, why is he in danger in this particular moment? So I think if we take a look at our, again, our fourfold interpretation, we'll see what's going on. So the physical danger corresponds to a fact about Dante's life. We know that he was exiled from Florence. We know that he was exiled from Florence when the Pope sided with his political enemies, and as part of the deal, his side, his political side, was exiled from the city. And Dante was a high-ranking official in Florence, and he was accused of, among other things, graft. So this is the sin that Dante was accused of, and it's the trumped-up charge that sort of is the screen behind which his enemies are going to then like kick him out of the city. Well, you've done this thing, you've done this wicked thing, and so we don't want you in our city anymore. We can't just say we don't agree with you, you're our enemy, out you go. We need a charge that's going to be covered. And Dante's, remember, hiding behind the rock. So we have all of these images of like hiddenness, concealedness. And if you remember, the demons here are harassing the damned who are in a lake of boiling pitchy tar. And then they're hooking them with their hooks. So that's why I've included this illustration from the lovely William Blake. These demons are hooking the damned, and they are underneath the pitch. Just as their sins were hidden and concealed, so they are stuck under the pitch. And then Dante is sort of compounding this by hiding. Anyway, so this is the sin that he was accused of, and this is the moment where he's in physical danger, I think, to highlight that. So that's okay. We're like, yeah, allegorical significance, but like, he didn't do the sin, right? So how does that link in? I think that part of what Dante is doing in this section, and this is cantos 21 and 22, and they're colloquially known as the gargoyle cantos, because you have these demons, and they're gross, they're disgusting. They are using like, it's not even potty humor, but they're yucky. They're yucky, and the way that they are engaging and interacting sort of spins from like terrifying. They're chasing, they're running, they have these claws, they're ripping people's hands off. It's really quite yucky and vile. But then they're ridiculous. They're fighting each other. They're so distracted that they like completely miss Dante and Virgil sneaking and running away because they're too busy attacking each other. Like, they're tooting. That's their military signal. Like, really? We're supposed to take these guys seriously? I think we are, but we're also not. So I'm wondering if part of the reason that Dante has like ratcheted up the comedy in this section is kind of to mock the false charges against him, right? Like, really? This is the crime? This is the crime that you don't have any evidence. Like, bring the evidence. You don't have any. I don't belong here. He doesn't belong in this circle. He runs away from this circle, right? So I think that might be part of what's going on here. I also think that there might be an element of just highlighting the nature of their sin here. The demons are at each other's throats. Like there is not a lot of cooperation in hell. Even when the demons are given a job, like keep the damned in this pit, they're not able to fully do that well. Like the damned have all these signals and they're sort of evading the gargoyle, the demons. And I think part of that is to sort of highlight the social destruction that comes with the sin of graft, right? It wrecks cities, it messes cities up. So if we think about, so there's the first two interpretations. If we go to the third in our fourfold series, the moral message here, clearly, like, don't involve yourself in graft. That's a bad thing. You shouldn't do that. But I also think when Virgil tries to outsmart the damned, and Mark Vernon is very eloquent on this. If you have a minute, go listen to his videos. They're excellent. But I also think that there's a moment, right, where it seems like in trying to trick the demons, they're sort of doing what the demons are doing too, right? Like they're being tricky, um, they're not acting in light of the truth. And that's something we should be doing. So lying to the damned, tricking the like it's not a good idea. Like, don't do that. Like stand on the truth. So that's one possible takeaway from Canto 21. Okay, now we get to the part that some of my students anyway, I think read the Inferno and read it with excitement, mostly because they want to see the very pit, right? They're like, I want the end. I want to know what's at the center of hell. And then I get to draw it. And that's very exciting for them, for most of them. So when we get to circle 9, we're at the deepest part of hell and we see Satan. So here's the description that Dante gives us. The emperor of the universe of pain jutted his upper chest above the ice. If he was once as beautiful as now he is hideous, and still turned on his maker, well may he be the source of every woe. Under each head 2 wings rose terribly. Remember, he has 3 heads, so 6 wings. Their span proportioned to so gross a bird. I never saw such sails upon the sea. They were not feathered. Their texture and their form were like a bat's wings, and he beat them so that all 3 winds blew from him in one great storm. It is these winds that froze all of the 9th circle, right? Just the last part of hell. So in order to understand what's going on with this last image that we get in hell, I think we have to go back to the very beginning. We have to go back to the gates of hell. So bear with me. I am the way into the city of woe. I am the way to a forsaken people. I am the way into eternal sorrow. Sacred justice moved my architect. I was raised here by divine omnipotence, primordial love, and ultimate intellect. Only those elements time cannot wear were made before me, and beyond time I stand. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. The picture is from Rodin's The Gates of Hell, which is well worth zooming in on. There are a couple images here that are taken right from Dante's story, and they're some of the more famous illustrations, depictions of hell. Okay, so the gates were raised by divine omnipotence, power, primordial love, and ultimate intellect. A surprise, to be sure, right? In one sense, the forces that build hell correspond to the 3 parts of the Trinity: power, wisdom, love, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So hell is a project that the whole Trinity has sort of collaborated on to create. They were built before earth, which means they were built before anyone sinned, which means they were built before they were needed, right? Hell was created before anyone had sinned, before anyone fell away. But they are clearly a necessary part of God's creative endeavor. We read, beware as you come in whom you trust. Don't be deceived because the gate is wide. Minos tells Virgil and Dante this. We read that the first circle and all the other circles after them are cursing the power of heaven. The gates of hell show us that hell is something that people choose. It's where you go when you don't want to be with God. You made choices in your life that have aligned you with the forces that are in opposition to God. God is not going to force you to join his side. He's going to give you a place where you can go if you don't want to be with him. That's hell, which I find completely terrifying. And I think that's the point, right? If we take a look at Satan, Satan is the picture that shows us this, right? Satan is locked in the ice. Here, we've got Charity again. Thank you. And some of these notes here come from Charles Matthews, who speaks really eloquently about the end of hell. So thanks to him for his good work. Satan is locked in the ice. He's beating his wings, and the motion of his wings is what's freezing the lake. And the lake being frozen is what keeps Satan in hell. So what's keeping Satan in hell? It's his own beating of his wings. Why is he beating his wings? Because he's trying to get away from God. He's trying to get as far away from God as he possibly can. And in so doing, he is locking himself in the ice. So if we come back to our initial question, is hell locked from within or without? I think the last image that Dante gives us is the answer to that question, right? It's locked from within. The damned don't want to leave. The gates of hell are wide open. Anybody can go. Anybody. Everybody? Anybody can go to hell. So make a good choice, right? That seems to be the final moral lesson that Dante is offering us in the Inferno. Make the right choice. Don't lock yourself in hell. There's a better way. Climb out, get out. But in order to do that, there's quite a lot involved. Okay, so the last thing that I give to my students when we're studying the Divine Comedy is some version of this assignment. So I just want to sort of throw it out there. I don't think it's a great question maybe to discuss as a group, but it's a good question to think about as you're brushing your teeth at night or, doing whatever else is that you're doing sort of on autopilot. So when we first meet Dante, he is lost in the dark wood of error, in danger of being destroyed by his sin. To save his soul, he ventures into hell. His task requires him to see life and sin as God does. It's not enough to be frightened of the beasts who personify sin. Dante must shape his will and his affections. He must love as God does and what God does. So I think one of the questions that the Inferno invites us to ask, invites us to sit with, is why is change so hard? Why do you choose to sin and wither? And what would you have to do to change? So, thank you all.